individuals have a right and a responsibility. This is the word that you're going to see over and over again now. And this is the word that I've been using over and over and over again. I think talking about the responsibility resonates much better, means much more, and is much harder to fight back against and to start going into constitutional nuance of what the Founding Fathers meant. We talk about responsibility instead of rights. Now, I know we all want us to talk about rights and what can't be infringed and what God gave us or the country's not allowed to take away from us and all that stuff. But if it's not resonating, if it's not making any sense, if people aren't responding to it, what good does it do to keep repeating it? So I'm trying to switch the conversation to one of responsibility. We talk about the right and responsibility to personal defense. What I was talking about earlier was SARC. If we teach kids they are responsible for their own personal defense, bullying stops. We teach women that they are responsible for their own personal defense, sexual assault goes down. We teach individuals that they are responsible for their own personal defense, and we stop talking about the Second Amendment and the right to own guns in this country. Because people understand that they have a responsibility to be able to protect themselves or others. Don't wait for the SWAT team, don't wait for the cops, don't wait for the security guard. You are responsible. Now, how are you going to meet that responsibility? Obviously, owning a firearm, knowing how to use it, creates a much higher level of opportunity for you to meet that responsibility than awareness or locking your doors or giving some money to the FPO thinking that the police are going to hire more people or whatever it is you're doing. Hiring the right police chief, voting for the right deputy or sheriff. No, you are responsible for your own personal safety. I think this is a huge piece of the conversation.
We'll be flagging us about 9:30.
Yes,
it's
thank
about
you.
9:30.
Thank you.
Well, just
Sir.
on that point, what I'm telling regarding the school shootings is that ultimately the parents are responsible to make sure their kids are safe. And it's the parents that need to be going to the school board meeting and demanding security, or they're going to jerk their kids out of that school. But it's also the parents who have to pass the school bond levies to provide security for their children.
Yeah, and again, this is part of this conversation. This conversation is with the parents. It is at the school board meetings. It's very much individuals.
Rob,
Go.
I've got one of my daughters is first year first grade teacher, Tulsa, Oklahoma, Teach for America, disadvantaged school, had a lockdown. And you know, to talk to her after that, the traumatic experience that she's responsible for, and she's like, Dad, we're lambs for the slaughter. So, you know, this, from my perspective, is more than the parents as well. You know, I've got a dog in the fight.
Yep.
And this is, you got to give them some tool because the school will give them nothing. And you get a lock on the door that works.
Individuals.
Yeah.
I don't care if it's a 6-year-old. At some point, if we can, I just put up a podcast link to a podcast called News Shooter Podcast. A guy named Nick Hoffman, I think is that thing. He's got a new podcast. He's pretty high quality, production quality. I did one with him. I talked for about 30 minutes about the SARC program. And one of the things I said is, I don't see a lot of school psychologists lining up to tell us how damaging and traumatic it is to tell children that when they catch their clothes on fire, they should stop, drop, and roll. Right? We've been telling kids that forever. And we don't see scars, and we don't see trauma, and we don't see all this horrible, debilitating, psychological aftermath from telling kids they might catch on fire. So if we tell them that the bad guy might come in the room and they might have to jump out a window, or they might have to throw a chair at him, or they might have to put their backpack on backwards because it would stop bullets. And you're going to see we're going to address kids here in this right to keep and bear arms talking points also. I think that's okay. We need to have these conversations, all individuals. Legislating training isn't the answer. It's because people will ask me this. You own a training company. I imagine you'd be in favor of legislation of training. No. Here's what I'll say, and it's not really the talking point, but one thing that I will definitely say is that overwhelmingly, bureaucratically established training is far below the bar. Far below the bar. Concealed carry, this is going to be a thing that we're going to start really hammering in the near future. We're launching a program in March to start addressing this. Concealed carry classes that don't address presentation from the holster in some dynamic way are flawed, are borderline reckless, and I would just as soon lobby states to not allow people to have concealed carry permits if they haven't had that training, as I would say, I think it's about equal. Either have that or get rid of it and go to constitutional carry. Because if you get rid of it and you go to constitutional carry, this is what I have found overwhelmingly in conversations with people. If you don't legislate training, if you let the community and the culture of firearms owners tell people, hey, Here's your gun. You have a right to it, but you also have a responsibility to get the appropriate training and to be skilled in its use and to store it properly and control its access, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think that works a lot better than giving somebody a bullshit 4-hour course and a piece of plastic or a piece of paper that says, you are now trained and certified and you are good to go, and they believe it. Right? And we all have been complaining about it in law enforcement forever, but I don't know how often we turn that criticism of law enforcement training standards against the concealed carry community. Sometimes we celebrate that it's easy to get a permit, and yet at the same time we're criticizing low standards in the public sector. Well, I think that's the wrong way to approach it. It's pretty hypocritical. Just as much as we lament the low standards that are established by the bureaucracy in the public sector, we need to consider how low the standards actually are in the private sector. And I would say let's get rid of all the training requirements and let people figure out by themselves that they need training, because we're telling them and we're making it part of responsible firearms ownership that you go out and get the proper training. We don't set a bar that is so ridiculously low that people can pass it and then feel like they're trained, feel like they're competent, feel like they're ready. I think that's reckless. I think that's dangerous. So what am I saying? Am I saying legislate training? No. But am I at the same time telling people in middle America the kinds of things that make sense? People should be trained. People should take this responsibility seriously. People should be controlling access to their firearm. We're going to get to that next. Somewhere in here, I think. Responsible firearms owner control access to their firearms. All right? If you have a kid that's on meds, you don't leave the guns under the couch. Figure it out. All right? You get the quick access safe for your defensive guns. You get the long-term storage safe for your collection. You figure it out. You don't just sell guns or give guns to your reckless buddies, that haven't had the training. You take responsibility as a firearms owner to control access. You don't say, well, it's his right to have the gun, and walk away. You don't say it's my right to have the gun, and the government's not going to tell me where to put it. All right? I'm not in favor of legislation like exists in California about how you have to store your guns, but I'm absolutely in favor of people controlling access to their guns. Willingly, voluntarily, out of responsibility, because you are a responsible firearms owner. And that is something, again, that's what people want to hear. Dianne Feinstein may not give a shit, but the people in the coffee shop, the people in your town, they want to hear that you as a responsible firearms owner encourage controlling access to guns. Sir?
Well, I had Starbucks the last 2 mornings. Both mornings have been over my stupid little wrist bracelet from USSA, and all the girls working at Starbucks now come to Rangemaster to take training.
Yeah. You can start this conversation very easily, and you guys know probably I'm not a big fan of strapping the AK-47 on your shoulder and going to get coffee. That's not how you start the conversation. All right, that doesn't help. But you can have the conversation in other ways. You can make it happen. I have this on the back of the iPad, and I'll lay this down on the counter while I'm ordering the coffee. I'll lay this down on the counter while I'm buying a shirt at Saks or whatever. Like this is a conversation starter. I don't have to be carrying my gun openly in a drop leg holster with 17 magazines. Zombie fighter shirt. Children should be taught gun safety and responsibility. There was a whole week. The media stuff is pretty themed, right? People have they have their talking points, whatever's in the media, they want people to talk about them. So great. We'll talk a little bit about how to get into the media at the end of this, but great. You want to talk about the Missouri law, right? Requiring school gun safety to be taught. You guys heard that was in the news pretty big like 2 weeks ago. So I probably did 10, 12 interviews that week on radio shows around the country about this law in Missouri. Absolutely, children should be taught gun safety. Is it right to teach kids as young as 6 about guns? Yes.
To teach them about sex.
Here's why. Here's why. Everywhere, and this is something I've been saying for a decade. You can see articles, and I've been talking about this for a long time. Now it's part of the cultural conversation. Why is it in the public education sector, everything else that we consider a danger or a threat to kids or our society, we educate them about, but not guns? Sex education? Talk about it. Give them condoms. Drugs? Talk about it. Driving? Talk about it. Drinking? Talk about it. Smoking? Talk about it. Do we talk about guns? No, guns are dangerous. What the fuck are you talking about? That was, you just told me that we had to talk about sex to an 8-year-old because unprotected sex. You just told me that we had to talk about drugs to a 7-year-old because misusing drugs or abusing even drugs that their parents or grandparents might have in the closet could be dangerous. Fire. We educate kids. When do you, at what point do you educate your kids in your house about lighters and matches? How do you dictate when you do that? If you've never thought about it, think about it now. What dictates the time frame when you do that?
First time they're interested in a match.
Interested would be one, if they ask about it. What else?
Access,
Access. And think about your
maturity level.
maturity level. I don't know, because that's the conversation they want to have. When are they mature enough to think about fire? What about ability?
Able to strike a match.
Ability,
Oh, yeah, ability.
right? Think about it. If you have a 2-year-old, you're not going to bother teaching them about matches, right? But you got a 5-year-old, and now the friends of the family come over that smoke, or kids come into your house and you smoke, and there's lighters around. You get a 5-year-old that can work the lighter. You get a 5-year-old that can strike the match, that sees you do it all the time. You know that they might mimic that behavior. That's when you start. So yeah, if a kid's old enough to pull the trigger, if the kid's old enough to manipulate the gun, you better teach them about guns. So that's the conversation that I use with them. So when is it age appropriate? It's age appropriate when they are physically capable of working the gun.